Let's go to the polls here because Labour is facing an electoral disaster in Victoria with up to 8 seats at risk of falling to the coalition. Now, this is according to the latest Redbridge-Accent tracking poll, which shows an 8.4% two-party preferred swing to the Liberals since the last election in what is traditionally the best performing state for the ALP. For more on this and these numbers, I'm joined by Tony Barry, Director of Corporate Affairs and Communications at the Redbridge Group. Tony, thank you so much for coming on Campaign Confidential tonight. First of all, take us through the top line of this polling numbers. How bad is this for Albanese, and where is there now a glimmer of light actually for Labour that might have Peter Dutton worried?
Thanks, James. Thanks for having me. Look, by tracking the key seats, we get a better idea of what's happening in the battlegrounds, okay? Because national samples are very good on an indicative level, which is, your classic news polls and Resolve, which are very good. But it doesn't tell us what's happening in those key battlegrounds, because what might be happening down pendulum is not necessarily what's happening up pendulum. What these tracking polls are telling us is that there is definitely a swing in these key seats as well as broadly across the nation. Albanese, he has recovered in the last week, and we put that down to him sort of dominating the conversation. He had the good fortune of the RBA interest rate cut, which allowed him to dominate the conversation there. That's the benefit you get of being an incumbent. He also had the Medicare announcement, which is, as your previous correspondent said, playing to his strengths, bringing it back onto a domestic agenda. And also the Whaler announcement came up in a lot of our unprompted work on our quantitative surveys. So that allowed him to sort of dominate the conversation. He had a small reward on our polling for doing that. But I think the really interesting thing is Dutton's leadership attributes. We tested those. We tested both attributes of the leaders, and Dutton had a massive lead there. And it really means that if you can bring it back to the character of the two leaders, as well as the issues agenda, bringing it back onto the economy, then I think Dutton has a very good chance here.
Well, so just to stick with the economy there for a second, I mean, I was frankly surprised to see these numbers and that they got such a bump on the Labour side out of that 0.25% interest rate cut from the RBA, particularly given Michelle Bullock's, very cautious notes around it, saying that, look, this is going to be the last one for a while. Are you surprised that they did so well out of that?
Look, I wouldn't call it. It was a very modest improvement for the Labor Party. Bear in mind, the soft vote is around 47%. That's extraordinary numbers. You go back to the Howard era, and the soft vote segment was around 25%. So there's a massive soft vote segment. So I think you're going to see a whole bunch of polls now bounce around because it just requires just a tiny little bit of good news or a tiny bit of bad news about one of the leaders for people to reassess their vote considerations. And I think, what we're going to see is, all these announcements are going to have some sort of impact until someone really, grabs the nettle here and with a significant signature policy that sort of moves some of that soft vote into that sort of hard vote segment.
Yeah, and at the same time, you're seeing in a lot of these seats in Victoria, which is, as you say, and everybody knows, Victoria is Labour heart ground. I mean, just take us through some of these seats in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. We're talking about Aston, Casey, Chisholm, and Menzies, and Corangamite as well out near Geelong. Yep. This has seen a massive two-party preferred vote shrink down to 43% from the 51.4% at the last election. If that carried through, that's a disaster for Labour, isn't it, Tony?
Yeah, so what on the key seats in Victoria that we're tracking, which is Corangamite, Aston, Dunkley, Menzies, and Casey and Chisholm, we're detecting an 8.4% swing against the government. Now, obviously swings aren't uniform, but we do know in these key seats, that's the level of swing we're experiencing at the moment. And that could grow, or it could actually diminish. But as I said, the vote is very soft. But if it does hover around that 8.4% mark, we're talking about 8 to 9 seats. I'm including Menzies as a notional Labor seat. I'm using the Anthony Green post-election redistribution pendulum, but no one honestly believes Keith Wallahan is in any trouble there. He's a great local member who's working hard. But we're talking about, I think, seats like McEwen and Aston are certainly absolutely in trouble, as is Chisholm. But then, the real worry for Labor is you're talking about seats like Corangamite and Hawke and Dunkley and Bruce down pendulum. Hawke in particular, because Sam Ray is a former campaign director for Labor Party, a very smart fellow, and he's the sort of future of the Labor Party. They won't want to lose that guy, and so they're throwing a lot of resources into that seat. It's an electorate that really should be Labor heartland, but what we're seeing in all our research, and in Sydney as well, those outer suburban seats are disconnecting from Labor Party. They don't feel they have shared values anymore, and so consequently, they're looking for an alternative. And Dutton is pitching to that segment, and he's doing a pretty good job.
Well, so how well is he doing at closing the deal, though, in some of those outer suburbs? Because I know from a lot of our reporting, at the Daily Telegraph about what's going on in outer suburban Sydney, and particularly around that scandalous minting of thousands of new citizens just on the eve of the election, that caused a lot of disturbance in some of those communities out in Western Sydney. Are those votes, are those preferences going to flow directly to the coalition, or are they going to get wound up, sort of distributed through some of these minor parties? And what do groups like the Muslim Votes organization have to influence in all of this?
Yeah, look, again, a very big soft vote. So they're currently looking at Dutton. They're very, very interested in the coalition, but they're not there yet. And they've got, I think pre-polls will open 4 weeks tomorrow, I think, 31st of March. That's my fearless prediction, which means it almost certainly won't be. But if it's a 12th of April election, then pre-polls open in just 4 weeks. That is not long. And mate, the one thing you can't buy in an election campaign, you can buy media, you can buy paid media, you can buy, resources, but you can't buy time. So the clock is ticking. The coalition really need to start pitching their message on cost of living. I think, obviously national security, defence, sovereignty, they're all important issues. But as the issues profile will show in today's Daily Telegraph, cost of living is the number one issue, followed by housing. Private and public health are a sleeper issue. Mm-hmm. And if you're not on those issues, you're not salient with the public. And I think, Dutton is obviously ticking those boxes of national security. That's important. But he really needs to own the economic narrative, because this election will be decided on that narrative.
So just to be really clear about that, in terms of, we've been talking about a lot of different issues here in the papers and on TV, but this is going to be, you would say, a cost of living election first and foremost.
Absolutely. And most federal elections are about the economy. There's some exceptions, but they usually are. 2001 was a national security, but that was after Tampa and 9/11, which was obviously extraordinary events. But they usually are about the economy, and this will be no different. I think there's some parallels to 1990 federal election. After the recession, we had to have high interest rates, high inflation, high unemployment. We don't have high unemployment right now. And yet Hawke was able to win that election. So it's a salutary lesson to Liberals. Yes, they're well positioned at the moment. There is a mood for change in the electorate, but they have not yet done enough to deserve to win the election in the eyes of the voters at the moment.
Well, as a very senior Liberal said to me the other day, it is a big hill to climb still. Tony Barry, thank you so much. Thank you for your great work with Redbridge, and look forward to speaking with you at your next round of polling.